When the pressure is high and the energy low, that's when your business needs inspiration to change and to grow. It's also when true captains show up. Hi, I'm Mark Francis, and I'm the host of this podcast that invites industry leaders from all over the world to answer the question, who's your captain? When you need to motivate and to mobilize, to develop and enable your team. Whether you are new to being a leader or you aspire to be a captain, this podcast is for you. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Thomas Coles. Hi, Thomas.
Hello, good morning.
I'm delighted because a number of reasons, actually. A net promoter score in your business of 79, positive 79, which AI tells me is world-class net promoter score for the work that you do. So,
and it's gone up.
Congratulations.
83 now. So,
getting better.
It's
That's fantastic. And we're going to talk about referrals specifically because that is your current expertise. But we're going to come back to that, Thomas, because we're going to take a big step back first. You are a wonderful serial entrepreneur who way back when, 9 months after graduating, formed your first tech business. So you have several businesses that have succeeded over the years as an entrepreneur. And that's where I'd love to start. What's the difference between an entrepreneur like your good self and the vast majority of business people who simply aren't entrepreneurs? What would you say is the thing that makes entrepreneurs that little bit special?
That's probably attitude to risk, isn't it? There are people out there who have an idea, probably better than any idea I've ever had, but they're a bit reluctant to take the risk of losing the corporate salary and the easy job. I started my first business 9 months after graduating, so I never had the opportunity of the easy life, and I never had the opportunity of learning from watching other people's mistakes. I was quite happy to just dive in and see what happened.
Now, that is innate. It sounds innate because that's immediately after graduating. My first job after graduating was to go into a graduate program of a big corporate, which is the opposite of risk, isn't it? It's sort of the safe CV starter where most of the things that you do as an entrepreneur are done by someone else in the big corporation and you can just get on with your day job. So I'm at the opposite spectrum of risk. But tell me a little bit about the verb solve, because you have successfully grown 2 businesses that had the word solve in it, and your current business, Solve Referrals. How come you chose that verb for most of, if not all of your businesses, Thomas?
We had a clever branding agency.
So that was software solved, wasn't it? And it was risk solved.
Correct.
Past tense of the verb, and now it's Solve Referrals, which is present tense. So how come the switch from past tense to present tense?
Well, it was a bit clumsy to say referrals solved because you've got a word ending with an S and then another word starting with an S. So that's part of the reason. But my experience, and there's data that supports it, is that an awful lot of businesses have not got any idea how to make referrals work for them. There are lots of things that classically go wrong in most businesses around the topic of referrals. So it's not a case of we've done it before and solved it and we can solve it for you. Past tense makes, in software solved, for example, makes people feel comfortable. You've been there and done it. It'll be fine. You can do it again. Solve Referrals is about helping a group of human beings, because it's all about a team in a business, to make change in how they approach the topic of business development, self-origination of leads, and therefore generating referrals. Whilst I have been there and done it, I've worked with over 100 businesses. Each one is sort of unique in the sense that they are human beings that have to be influenced. It's not just here's a cookie cutter process.
So this is great stuff, because I'm definitely going to dive in a little bit about referrals, because as a salesperson, career salesperson myself, this is a major gap for me, even though all my logic says I should have a systematic way of managing referrals, because it is the most successful way to get more business, is to generate business from people who already know you. The logic is pure and straightforward, and yet the behavior is completely different. Can you help me explain that? Because I won't be alone. You'll be working with loads of businesses that don't have any systematic way to manage referrals. Why do you think that is? Why is there a gap there?
So there's a number of different problems that occur in most businesses, and systemization is definitely one of them. There are two key elements to the systemization problem. I'd like to take all the founders that might be watching or listening to this at some stage back to when they first started their business. I'm pretty confident that when anybody starts a business, without doubt, the first 10 clients probably come from the founders network. It's just absolutely intrinsic to how you start a business.
Yeah,
And then as
totally.
the business grows and is more successful over time, you start hiring a team, you start investing, creating various different budgets, but investing in marketing in particular. And as you build a team, it becomes embarrassing to most people to rely on referrals. They try and expand beyond referrals and use lots of different techniques to generate leads and therefore generate demand. Instead, the data tells us what people should be doing is, of course, you've got to do that stuff too. You should be leaning into referrals and systemizing them across the whole team. So just sharing one piece of data, what we are told is that 83% of your satisfied clients are willing to recommend you, but only 29% do without being asked. So therefore, as a minimum, your team should be activating the 54% gap. And there's lots more opportunity besides that. So the first thing is not maintaining the approach to referrals that a startup has, thinking that you've got to grow up, whereas actually referrals are a very powerful way to grow a business. And secondly, it's not just about the founders network, it's about everybody's networks. Referrals are a human to human activity, and therefore everybody in a business is a human being, and everybody in business has a network. I challenge clients, and I would challenge anybody listening to this, even your bookkeeper has got a network, and he or she has probably never been asked to seek a referral from one of your suppliers who have a vested interest in helping you.
Yeah, you know, it's, it was when we first spoke on the phone, Thomas, I was thinking every single word you say applies to me in terms of how did I start my business in the first place. I wrote to 10 key customers. You mentioned the number 10, and I generated business from 3 relatively quickly. And then the next business that came from that was actually from referral, but I didn't ask for it. They actually said, oh, there's a new guy on the block. He's quite good. And then never systemized it. Uh, Certainly, as my business has expanded from just me to it's 33 of us now, which is a small to medium sized business. Have I systemized the way in which we do that? Not at all. Have I spoken to our bookkeeper about referrals? Do you know, I might have done 20 years ago or maybe 15 years ago. You can, you can see that gap, that 54% gap is very much applying to me. So we are going to talk about how do we change that? And that's a general question, of course. Why do you think it is, though? What is really stopping us? You gave us a clue there in terms of saying, well, you get bigger and you think, I can't anymore. I feel guilty about just using my network, so we'll stop doing that. Why else do you think people aren't necessarily optimizing referral?
So the other two key things that I see go wrong in most organizations, to be honest, are secondly, if people remember to ask, they do so in a very generic way. And before we started this recording, you gave me an example of that very generic way. However you go about that sort of vague question of, do you know someone else who might work with me? Typically, the person you're talking to has all best intentions and they respond with that classic phrase I bet you've all heard, hey, I'm happy to help. I'll have a think. But the thinking never transpires, does it? And I
No.
know I've said those words. That is because asking generically doesn't help the person who you are asking to identify one person in their mind. We need to be more specific. And then the
Okay.
third thing that goes wrong alongside the systemization and the generic ask is actually the most important of all. People, especially in teams, but even in the C-suite, in senior roles, have self-limiting beliefs or mindset issues which make them create excuses for themselves in the moment when they should be asking. So, oh, well, I better not ask this person right now because something means it doesn't feel quite right to me. And we need to get people to overcome that thinking so that they don't miss opportunities to ask. And I suspect from what you've said to me, maybe that would include you.
It does. and yeah, I mean, I'm already formulating, learning from what you're saying here, Thomas, that number one, prepare for it. So think about it and prepare for a conversation which needs to be in person. That's an in-person conversation, not a follow-up email saying, oh, do you know anything else? It's got to be in the moment, but it's also got to be relatively assertive. So the how you do it matters just as much as doing it, because otherwise you get the leave it with me kind of style, which means it's never their priority. And of course, therefore, probably doesn't happen.
And the reason that people say, I'll have a think or leave it with me, is not that they're fobbing you off, which is how a lot of people interpret it. And the data shows us, if someone's got, say, 2,000 connections on LinkedIn, in reality, they probably know 40 to 50% of them. As people have more connections, the percentage they know drops massively. So recruiters, for example, have a much lower percentage they know. But if you know up to 1,000 people, how do you choose one of those 1,000 people in the moment that someone's asked you for a referral? It's just an intractable problem. And that's why people say, I'll have a think, because they're overwhelmed. That's why we have to be using a more intelligent approach to how we ask, so that we can get help the referrer to think through their network.
So I'm fascinated, Thomas, around how did this come about? How did Solve Referrals come about? In the sense that already I get this lovely feeling that you're someone that sees a problem that might be relatively niche. And then you go, right, I can solve that. And then I can be the consultant, the international speaker, the sharer of the solution. But where did the real passion around referrals come from? Why did you think, do you know what, this is where there's a sweet spot for me?
So I said earlier that I've never worked for a corporate. I've never learned from other people's mistakes. I've had to learn from my own experiences throughout my career, which has been long now. Just don't know how that happened. So the first element of the answer to that question is that I realized that referrals were really successful when I was running my own businesses. Shock horror. I mean, yeah, instinctively, we all know that. In fact, instinct is an important point. Anybody you talk to about referrals, if you steer the conversation in the right direction, is already using them instinctively in their personal lives. They're using them to find the new plumber or hairdresser or beautician or whatever they need at home. Probably because it's a relatively low risk, they are going to the neighborhood WhatsApp group and just saying, hey, can anyone recommend a plumber? And they get a satisfactory answer. But for some reason, that behavior is not intrinsic at work, which is why your point earlier is absolutely valid. You must never ask for a referral digitally in a professional context. You've always got to do it in a human to human conversation. Now, that can be on the phone, on a Teams call, whatever, or in person in a meeting, but it can't be electronic. I would characterize it as the only person you know well enough to ask for a professional referral is probably your best man, maybe your family. Beyond
Yeah.
that, you just can't do it. So I need to come back to your question. The catalyst for it was firstly that I know it worked. The second element of that was that I was asked during lockdown, so 2020, by a membership group that I'm part of, do any members have a topic they could talk on for half an hour to help the collective to find a way to survive through lockdown? And of course, we were all discovering Teams and Zoom at that point in our careers. So therefore I said, well, yeah, I could help people to generate more referrals when they're having coffees on Teams or Zoom. And that's where the content came from. I actually put together my thinking into what was originally a half-hour session with then half an hour of people practicing and asking each other for referrals live.
And right now, what's your personal ideal client? What client do you love to be working with on this topic, Thomas? What's the ideal client for you?
So you will not like this answer because of the expertise you've got. I'm always telling my clients when I'm working more generally in a sales consultancy relationship that you need to have focus. You need to be able to identify your ideal client, exactly like the question you've just asked. I can't do that. Referrals are so powerful horizontally that they work for almost any sort of business, any size of business, in any industry. The only place that they don't work is in high volume retail. So places like Boots or Tesco's, they just don't have the
Mm.
relationship with their customers. Whereas in lower volume retailers, such as maybe jewelers, where they've got often a better relationship with their customers, they can. So have a very broad spectrum of organizations that I can help to grow faster and at very low incremental marketing cost. Where it works really well are organizations who already rely on referrals but are not systematic. They just have a hope strategy, which is not a strategy, in my opinion. So professional services, wealth managers are particularly good at getting referrals after they've had training from me, because they recognize if they said to somebody at a networking event, they're not allowed to cold call anymore. Hey, can I look after your money for you? They're going to get a very short answer, which I won't repeat on this session. Lawyers, accountants, consultants, those sorts of people get massive value from referrals, but it's not limited to that. And I've worked with IT services businesses who are global with 300 salespeople and average first order value 10 million euros. That's a 2-year sales cycle. Referrals can still work for that side of the business. The ideal sort of client I'm looking for at the moment is actually event managers who are looking for speakers. I really enjoy the opportunity to be on stage and therefore sharing the knowledge and the impact that can come from having a referral strategy in your business much more widely. And I can touch more businesses quicker by having that opportunity.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I didn't expect that answer. So, event managers who are looking for a speaker, and therefore you can help that process by making it a little bit more systematic than who should we have for our next conference?
Well, no, I'm looking to be the speaker. I do
Well, that
keynote
I can
speaking. I do keynote speaking
clearly.
all over the world, and the typical event manager, when they're looking for a keynote speaker, is thinking they want somebody who delivers fun. Whereas actually, the feedback they get after I've spoken is, "Can we have him for longer next time?" Because there's
Oh,
always
that's
more to
great.
learn.
There's the net promoter score going higher and higher. 83, amazing. I'm going to ask you a question just for my own clarity of understanding. You mentioned, Thomas, this point about horizontal referrals. What did you mean by that?
Oh, that was getting at the sort of businesses I work with, horizontal as opposed to any one vertical.
Ah,
So
got you.
I can work with any industry, is what I was meaning.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. And now, key question for me, and again, very selfish because I need this competence. When you're in that face-to-face moment where it is appropriate, you've delivered to a high standard, and they are probably sharing how pleased they are. What a great program that was. Thank you. I noticed the difference in my team already. It's really, really good. And therefore it's the right moment. How do you phrase, whether it's a question or a statement, how do you do that? How do you phrase it in a way that isn't clunky? Like, do you know anyone that might, which is the standard way. And the standard response is, leave it with me. I'll have a think. What is the right way? What are some of your tips for getting that message across in the right way?
So, assuming you're in a one-to-one meeting of some sort, in a coffee shop, whatever, with someone you trust and they trust you, firstly, you're probably going to leave asking for a referral towards the end of that meeting. You need to have had a purpose to meeting anyway. You can't
I
just
agree.
meet to get referrals unless you're explicit and upfront with the person you're meeting and they are doing the same. And then there's a reciprocation opportunity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's ideal to prepare, think ahead rather than in the moment. And I'm happy to share a tip with everybody. Whether you actually prepare an agenda or not, I would think through the agenda for yourself and always include AOB, any other business. We all know what it means. It's not offensive. If you put on agenda to meet with the client, I'm going to ask you for a referral, that has the risk of antagonizing. It might not be liked by everybody who reads that. Whereas if they see AOB, they will be totally nonplussed. But you should see it as a trigger to ask for a referral. Literally interpret it as, can I find any other business by asking this person for a referral? So the first thing to do in that moment is to assess, has the tone of this meeting been warm enough that I feel confident I can ask? if your potential referrer just got out of bed the wrong side that morning, or maybe is dissatisfied with something you've done recently, there may be many reasons why you shouldn't ask, but you mustn't let those act as an excuse. The majority of meetings you have, you could be asking. So I encourage you, by the way, to look at how you can keep yourself accountable by considering the ratio of meetings in which you do ask for a referral. The ratio can be something you track weekly. I've got one client who have a league table around their office of that ratio on a weekly basis, and the person with the lowest ratio at the bottom of the league table has to buy donuts for everybody else. Whatever would work. Back to the point. If you've assessed that the tone is warm enough that you can ask, you need to ask doing two things. Firstly, being more specific, and secondly, always ask using a closed question. And the advantage of that is that it's something we don't usually do in sales because it stops people's creative thinking and stops them necessarily hearing or giving us the opportunity to hear what they might want to share. But it makes it safe for the referrer to say no. And there are all sorts of reasons why they might want to say no, but then saying no, they don't damage the relationship they've got with you.
It's fantastic advice, and I write these things down because, of course, I could watch this back. I could watch it again. But just by writing it down, it's making a really strong connection. And for me, AOB is huge here. So is there any other business for me? I love that little I love that little tweak about it's not just anything else. It's specific to more business. This point about closed question is the other one, because I think that for me is the biggest one that is stopping me, apart from not thinking about it in the first place, which is, more for me. But actually, it's the closed question. And give us an example of a closed question, because I know what you mean by that. And I love the psychological point that says it's easy for them to say no, not really. So there's no pressure on the relationship from closed. I get that. But give me an example of that is a positive help from a closed question to get you where you might want to be.
I will do so. There's one more point to note, and given that you train on negotiation skills in part, you'll already know the power of silence. After you've asked your closed question, you've got to shut up and listen. You've got to give the person time to think.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I think you know me already quite well, Thomas. It's like, yeah, that'll be a strain for me. But yes, it's a definite should do. I love that.
So let me give you an example, going back to the fact that I'm looking to meet event managers. So
Yes.
I could simply, in that moment, use the phrase, I'm looking to meet more event managers who need to book keynote speakers at the moment. Do you know any?
Yeah, I like that. I'm looking. Do you? Those are the triggers for me. I'm looking to XYZ, in your case, event managers, and therefore me as a speaker. Do you know any? So you're framing it, and then comes the simple to answer closed question. And I can see how that works. I really can, because there would be a natural silence, because it's unlikely to go, oh yes. They'll go, oh, let me have a think. But then they answer the let me have a think in the moment rather than leave it with me, and then you'll never hear from me. So it's brilliant advice. It's brilliant advice. Now, I've come to that lovely moment in the podcast, Who's Your Captain, where I share with my guest, your good self, Thomas, what AI says about you. And this is really interesting. I always do this. It's fun to do. And it is, I ask AI, tell me specifically, I use Claude as a system, tell me specifically what makes Thomas Coles special. And it's fascinating. I'm going to play it to you, see what you think. And I'll pick the first three. It took about 5 things for you, but here are the top 3. Deep practical experience. And it alludes to your several companies that you've worked, that have been your companies in the industry. Second, systematic, not passive. And already in some of the answers, you're giving us a little bit more of a systemized way to go about it, rather than just hit and hope. And then the third is niche focus. And it explains what it means by that. Yes, of course, it's about referral, which is a niche, but it's actually specific to helping vendors win with large businesses. So it's those of us that are relatively small to medium size, winning with the big players, which is what you did very much with your earlier businesses, wasn't it? You had big insurance companies that you were working with. And so you've got practical experience of that. How does that sound? Deep practical experience, systematic, not passive, a real niche focus. Is that Thomas Coles?
I certainly see, or all of that resonates for me. I see where that information has to come from. I think
Exactly,
that
yeah.
the key word that summarizes that summary for me is credibility.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
Referrals help any size of vendor to have credibility amongst potential clients, and if you like, to get their foot in the door with an organization where they wouldn't otherwise be able to generate a relationship. But can I dive a bit more into the subject of credibility?
Please do.
So I would argue that if you really distill a sales process down to three things, it's all about generating credibility, because most buyers, and I'm going to say this publicly, even in the public sector, although they won't admit it, make a decision to buy emotionally, and then they post-rationalize their decision. Therefore, our job as salespeople is not to sell to them, because you can't ever persuade anyone to buy anything. You can only enable them to buy things. So our job as salespeople is to instill sufficient credibility that they make a decision in our favor and can justify it to their stakeholders. So how do we do that? If you distill that sales process down, a referral, i.e. a recommendation, gives you credibility before you even open your mouth. That's a great place to start a conversation. The second thing best salespeople do, and I suspect you've made a career out of helping people to do this, is they ask deeply searching, intelligent questions that demonstrate their understanding of the client's problems, and then they shut up and give the client a good listening to. And that has two effects. Firstly, it changes the client's thinking from, do I want to do business with this person, to, this person is already helping me get a deeper understanding of my own challenge. Therefore, how can I do business with them? And secondly, it blows all competition out of the water because they're not doing the same thing. And then the third element of a good sales process that instills credibility is not to talk very much, but instead to use stories in order to illustrate your past credibility of where you've previously delivered success. And of course, those stories are really easy for the buyer or buying team to then share with their boss or shareholders, whoever, in order to convey why you've got that credibility.
I completely agree. And, and I'm just going to play back some of the key points because it's reinforcement. There's the point about questioning. And, you said really probing questions is the difference that makes the difference. So I'm not just going to ask generic questions, what's your pain point? Generic question. No, it has to be much more insightful and much more probing so that the response is, now you're asking, yes, that's it, right? And there's the moment. And actually, it's don't talk much. That's the other key piece of advice, because you're listening and you're learning and you're not trying to sell. It's a different mindset. You stay in learning for as long as you possibly can. And then maybe towards the end of the conversation, you've earned the right to sell, but maybe not, because you haven't fully understood yet, or you haven't resonated and you haven't established your own credibility. So brilliant advice. The other element, just to reinforce, is this point about storytelling. And I'm still learning that skill because my brain is wired to say, oh, I've got the solution and it's this, which is a push sell, and storytelling is a pull sell. And it's amazing to me that in our schools and in our colleges, storytelling isn't front and center of a curriculum. As opposed to when I ask my audiences, when I do train storytelling, hands up if you've ever been trained in this before or educated. Minimal numbers of hands go up. Most people go, no, never. And yet it's so vital. I'd like to come back to system. Go on, Thomas.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to give you an example. Many
Please.
years ago, I was fortunate enough to win a project with the Royal Society, the preeminent scientific institution in the world. They'd been out to tender for a piece of software development work and had been unsatisfied with all of the bids they'd received. So they'd come out second time round, and we were one of the companies invited second time round to be involved. We were invited to a meeting with the IT director, the finance director, and another IT person. But when we got to the room, there were also 15 fellows of the society in the room. because that's the nature of institutions like that. They can just turn up. They are very good at ordering port, I will add, just in case that's useful to anybody. So in that meeting, we had prepared the day before a significant set of questions, and I was going as managing director of the company and taking a colleague who was effectively in a pre-sales role to cover the questions, and then he would do the estimating afterwards. Stood on the station platform at 6:20 in the morning. My colleague rang me and said he was ill and wasn't coming. And this is back in the day when everything was prepped on paper, and he had all the questions with him. So from memory, whilst I was on the train, I had to recreate that question set. And then it was me and these enormous number of people in the room from the society. But we eventually won the project. And the feedback we got was, despite being the most expensive bidder, the reason we'd won it was that we asked better questions than all of the other bidders, first and second time round combined. So it really illustrates the power of using questions. I've realised now I've done it. It also illustrates the power of storytelling, which was a whoopsie. But the third thing it demonstrates is that if you are really prepping well, you spend more time prepping than you do actually in the meeting. And what I really want to get across is there is no substitute for in-person meetings. This sort of session is absolutely fine to be done, but you really do need still to be traveling to meetings. It makes it easier to ask for referrals besides everything else.
No question, I agree with you.
Sorry,
No, because I'm not only am I thinking of my next question, I'm reflecting on that shared story. Because I am a salesperson. I do pitches. We did a big pitch online, as it happens, 2 days ago, and I'm reflecting: could we have done that differently? And we did well. Actually, there's 4 of us on the call, and we had allocated roles and prepared really well and rehearsed, did all the right things. Did we ask enough questions? No, definitely not. And it's tricky because we were on stage. It was like, tell us what you're going to do for us. So it's expected we do a lot of the talking. But I think each of us probably asked a couple of questions in an hour, which means 8 in total. Not enough, I don't think. It's only on reflection. Now, systematic. Tell me more about that, because as an individual already, and I have at least 2 meetings today where I am going to make sure I'm scoring on the ratio of I asked for a referral as opposed to I didn't. I'm going for 100% today. Tell me more about systematic. What does that mean in a business that is more than just one consultant or one person, one salesperson? What does systematic mean?
So when I'm engaged with a single company, helping them to adopt a referrals program and embed it into their business, systemization requires a number of different things. Firstly, it's that mindset change amongst individuals. That's a human and unique to every individual problem, so it's difficult to answer that in this context. Secondly, their line managers need to be maintaining accountability and coaching people on the subject of referrals to help the ones who are feeling reluctant, to help everybody to maintain their own accountability. So I'm sure you've seen it too. It's so often the case that businesses train the individual contributors, the field salespeople or account managers, whatever role, but they don't train their line managers, and then the behavior falls by the wayside all too quickly because the line manager keeps asking them to do the same stuff they were asking for before. So that's a really important point. I also think you have to lead from the top. The whole C-suite of any business has a network that's probably, I'm not going to say bigger, but richer or deeper than many others in the organization. And the whole C-suite should therefore be leading from the front by asking for referrals, but then handing them to the right team to continue the relationship of selling to those referees.
Yeah, and what triggers for me is the 3 M's of what you've said. At headline level, systematic means do something for the mindset, because the mindset does need to change. My mindset needs to change in order to drive behavior change. Mindset. It's managers. And so what's the follow-up? What's the coaching? What's the accountability, which is what you said? And also it's modeling from the C-suite. So the 3 M's is just my way of remembering it. Mindset, managers, modeling. And I get it. I completely get it, which means that when you're sitting in front of a business that needs this systemized approach, you're helping them with all of the meat of those bones, those what I call the 3 M's, because it's not an easy answer. Intellectually, people can get it, but they need your advice about the how, I suppose.
I think we could add a fourth M. Now you come up with that model: money or incentives. People who are on commission naturally have an incentive to generate leads. That's not going to be an issue. But for anybody else in the business, you might need to create an incentive for them. And I've seen lots of different examples of incentives that work over the years. It's actually worth asking your team what they would like. So that I was working with a SaaS business in South Africa recently, but they assumed cash was the right incentive, but they asked the question, and the team came back overwhelmingly with they'd like an extra day's holiday in return for getting a referral, which is fantastic. It's in effect nil incremental cost, and it's a bigger reward for the individual, which helps drive the right behavior. But I'd love to give you an example in a big business. I spoke in a hybrid meeting to a very large sales team distributed around the world. And when I sat down, the moment I sat down, chief exec sent an email out, and I pretty much quote verbatim from that email. She said, "This is a really important topic to our future. So although all of you that have been on this call are already on commission, I'm introducing an additional incentive for you. We, the company, will pay for you to have a slap-up meal out, any restaurant of your choosing. You, your spouse, will pay for the babysitter, but take the kids if you want to, take your parents if you want to, take the extended family." And literally the email said in brackets, "in the Maldives." So
Wow.
once a quarter, they are putting on an all expenses paid, all inclusive, significant incentive holiday to the Maldives. The real power of that technique is that I now get stopped by people who were on the Teams version of that session rather than in person in the room when I'm walking around the city of London. So I've never met them before. And they say to me, "That was a fantastic session. Every night when I get home, my wife says to me, 'Have you asked for a referral today?' Because she wants the incentive." And that's exactly what the chief exec was evidently aiming for. It's got the wider accountability, and the best accountability is probably your partner, isn't it?
Reminds me beautifully of when I was a salesperson working in London with a beer business, Whitbread Beer Company, and I had a patch and I had 120 customers, pubs and clubs and restaurants. And every year end, our biggest goal or KPI was get all the money in. Credit control, get on top of that and try and get all the money in for the beer you've sold. And one year, I got all focused on making sure I was the number one performing salesperson in terms of credit control. And I managed to achieve that. And exactly the story you shared, my sales director phoned me up and said, "Astonishing achievement, given you're in central London. It's the hardest patch to get money, and you still beat people from all over the country. Here's your reward." And it wasn't an incentive because it was retrospective, but here's your reward. I'd like you to take your wife out to any restaurant you like in Britain and spend as much as you like at that meal and wine and whatever. And if it's not near where you live, stay overnight and then just put it on expenses and I'll pay it. Now, although that was retrospective, the incentive to repeat the behavior, because it might generate recognition of that nature and reward, was incredible. I mean, it's the most effective incentive motivator I've ever had as a salesperson. It was surprised, to say the least, but my goodness me, and here's your point. My wife then was going, "Work harder, get out there and do that again," because that was incredibly special. Talking about 40 years ago now, but it still, I remember the evening when we were celebrating and it made all the hard work feel justified. That's the point. So brilliant. Okay, so we've got 4 M's now. We're getting there. Power of 3, but with an additional one around money or, and again, another point you made worth repeating, ask the people, ask your sales teams, ask everyone in your business, what would you like as a reward for getting referral business? So the bookkeeper can choose something other than money as an example. Love that. Love that. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in this conversation and our previous conversations, Thomas, is that although you have a real specialism, a niche in referrals, you have a broad perspective of what excellence looks like in terms of selling, influencing, leading. Very specific question about the services you provide. What else do you specialize in that you haven't yet mentioned? And this is very much about helping you grow your business. What else do you do that would add real value and does add value to your customers?
So I fundamentally do two things for organizations. And in fact, I have two brands. There's another Solve coming. So alongside Solve Referrals, I have Growth Solved. And that is focused on helping founders to replace themselves as the best salesperson, because it's probably the hardest hire they ever have to make. And it's not actually about the hiring being difficult and the individual candidates being poor at the job. There is a litany of stories I could tell about founders who've hired a salesperson on an enormous basic. And a year later, they've sacked them, they've hired another one, and 9 months in, they're thinking, this is not working. The salespeople are all rubbish. They tend to use stronger language than that. I can help founders to avoid that problem because it's not actually about the individual you hire. That individual who comes into your business has no process. They don't intrinsically know the business like the founder does. And in particular, they don't have any stories. On day one, when they arrive, they know nothing about the past history of the business, whereas the founder probably knows every story in the business. So I'm picking on stories because we talked about it before in this session. It's one example of the sort of things you have to provide as enablement for the new sales hire. So I do the process and enablement work in order to make sure those new hires are successful. And it's absolutely critical because I work with PE firms and the businesses they invest in. Valuations are affected by the founder being the best salesperson. I assure you, you need to replace yourself as the best salesperson before you come to an exit.
It's
As
so
you've done.
relevant. It's so relevant. Yeah, I was the original founder of one, the Uspire business. The main sales energy and engine is three of us, and we're all founders of the Uspire partnership, and that's Chester Robinson, Amanda Downs, and myself. And so it isn't just the founder, it's the founders. All of us need to replace ourselves with people who can tell the right stories relatively early on, rather than, listen, I'll bring in one of the founders to talk to you about it. I think it's so poignant, and I see massive value in that. So that's Growth Solved. You're also a speaker. So tell me a little bit about if one of the event managers says, we need you to come and speak for us, apart from the topics we've already talked about, and they're broad in themselves, what else do you specialize in when you speak, when you're called upon to bring inspiration from the stage?
So I am able to talk on other topics, but I prefer not to. I like to focus on referrals because it's where I
There's
offer
the
the most
niche.
impact to the audience.
Yeah.
A lot of keynote speakers aim to bring humor and their background, their biography type story to the conversation to illustrate points. I've been on the other side of the fence enough that I know what matters. I've been a member of a chief exec peer group for over 20 years of my career. I know that if you go to those events and you have a speaker who's doing that sort of keynote, the most value you can get is to take away 3 or 4 really actionable insights which are going to move the needle in your business. But that's what I want to do when I'm on stage. And the best way I can do that is by talking on referrals, not by giving a long story. When I have spoken on other topics, for example, I was in Bulgaria talking on digital transformation for one of the biggest banks in Bulgaria a couple of years ago. The feedback I got afterwards was, out of the 45 minutes that I was talking, there was one slide which was actually most useful to everybody. Strangely enough, that was the slide with the 5 points that I aimed to be the takeaways. I know how audiences work, so I want to focus on referrals.
Makes perfect sense. How does someone get in touch with you? What's the best way? I mean, classically, because we've said the names of your companies, people can Google them. But what's the best way someone can get in touch if they would love to work with you, Thomas? What's your recommendation?
Well, we've got a cat, so I wouldn't use a carrier pigeon, but anything else will work.
So I'm going to stand on the street and shout, Thomas, I need your help. Yeah. Any other method will help. Final tips. So final question is, top tip to get started. And we'll talk specifically about referrals. Because ultimately we want to get to a systemized approach across all levels of the business. But what's your top tip to get going on this, whether it's to one individual or to a company?
as with any other behavior change, the single most important thing you can do once you've been jogged or triggered by this session in order to think to yourself, like, I need to do something about referrals, the single most important thing you can do is get bloody started. Don't put it on your to-do list for something you'll come back to next week, because it will never reach that urgent and important point where you actually do something. Start now. Think about the meetings you've got today, first thing tomorrow, and work out how to ask for a referral in that meeting. Don't wait.
Thank you. It's exactly what I'm going to do today. 2 main meetings, 2 referrals, ratio 100%. That's the
Good luck.
plan. Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you.